All right, so in this demo, one of the first things I'm going to show you then to add to this composition that we're making is that there was a little flower that is down in the bottom left corner of the finished piece. And so if you go and find your you find your folder, there's some different ways. I mentioned that you can add stuff. And before, when we added the beach picture, I showed you when we just dragged it from an open file into this file, into the pineapple file. It basically, in the layers panel, it created it as a destructive, um, so that it would make destructive changes, any kind of change that it made. But if I want to make something that's non-destructive, there's some other ways that you can do this. You can do it from Bridge, you can do it from your Finder, whatever. So I'm going to actually take this flower picture that's in my Finder, and right now if you wanted to see the thumbnails, so you could see them better, you could do it as a thumbnail. So I could take this and I can basically drag it into my file. Let's try that again. There we go. And if I do that, you see it looks a little different now. It's not just like dropping it in. It gives you this kind of, this big X, and it's asking, where you want to put this file. And it's going to allow me to position it and scale it so that I can get it, to the size that I want it. And, I can kind of make my decision, and I guess that's probably not too bad, somewhere in this ballpark, right? And then when I'm ready to take care of it, if I, don't want to scale it or rotate it, and I think I'm okay. Actually, maybe I'll scale it just a little bit. Let's try it. Let's try scaling it some, and then we'll maybe move it up a little bit. So let's try somewhere in that ballpark. Let's just give that a shot. I can go ahead and commit to it by hitting the return key. And then you'll notice in the layer panel it looks a little bit different. It's actually got this little smart object thumbnail inside of my normal thumbnail, and what that means is that it's basically linked up to the original file, so that if I decide later that I want to come and scale that back up, I am not going to lose any of the original resolution. Because the picture, you saw how big it was when I originally placed it. Well, that's about as big as it can get, right? But I just made it smaller, and if I were to save this and close it, if I reopened it again, because this is a smart object, it would still allow me to scale it up and make some certain kinds of modifications to it. And I wouldn't lose the resolution. So that's kind of a nice feature. And I think the book tells you that it needs to be like right here above the pineapple, but thing is, it's never going to interfere with the picture, so it's really up to you if you want to leave it, above the pineapple or above the beach picture, whatever. It just needs to be below Hawaii, right? It needs to be below the word, and it needs to be above both pineapples. Okay. So that's one of the ways that you can add stuff as smart objects. And now if we want to move forward and start dealing right now with this text, we can start to address that. So one of the first things you'll notice about this is if I click on the Hawaii layer, Hawaii is, if it were a true text file that was editable text, it would actually have a T right here instead of a thumbnail of what looks like raster pixels. And it's not an editable text layer because this is raster pixels that it's giving me a thumbnail of. So these literally, just to give you an illustration, if I were to take my eraser tool, I could like literally erase through Hawaii because it is literally just raster pixels. I'm going to undo what I just did. That was just an illustration. I cannot edit this with the text tool, but I can make some new text that goes beneath it. And so, if you wanted to do as the book is doing, it gives the name of Island Paradise below it. And so to do that, what I can do is click on my text tool over here in the tool panel, and I'm going to choose my horizontal type tool. And there's some different ways that you can adjust this. For one thing, if I were to just click right now and start typing, you'll notice that it's a left orientation. If I want to make sure that it types directly out from the center, then I could change this so that it stays centered based on, maybe the word Hawaii or something like that. That might be easier. The other thing too is that up here I can choose the color of the text. So I'm going to go ahead and choose like a sort of a green. Um, you can choose the color specifically if you want to match what's in the book. I'm just going to choose this. I can always go back later and change it. And the other thing too is that I want to go ahead and select my typeface. And what's nice is that it actually shows you examples of the different typefaces. And so one of the standard things that comes with Adobe Type is this Birch STD for Birch Standard. So if I select that, you can see if you were to look at the example of Birch, you see that it's a condensed font, meaning that it's sort of vertically taller than it is wide. And so anyway, so if I were to type where I believe is probably about the center, then no matter how I change it later, it will adjust it in terms of the type size and stuff like that. So I think that probably somewhere in the center is probably somewhere around the middle of this W-ish, and then I can always adjust it later. So if I just click there, I can start to type island, and I'm going to type in all caps paradise. And I obviously did not type this large enough. All right. So if I wanted to change this, I could select by double or triple clicking, and then I can adjust my type size. So let's try something like 36. And one of the things that I need to do is this is because here, let's blow this up first of all. Because this type is actually condensed and it's very tight together, one of the things that we can also do is adjust the tracking so that the letters are further spaced out. So if I wanted to go up while this is selected or not, it's, you know, you can either select the entire thing or you can also click away from it and then just choose the type tool while this layer is selected and adjust it. But I'm going to go up here where it says window, and I'm going to find the character panel. And so if I go to the character panel, it pulls up this all this information for me to make adjustments. And so I can actually make some adjustments here, you know, where I adjust this value, you know, to something like 200. You can also just manually type stuff. So if you wanted it to extend a little bit further, you know, I think that the book does something like 250. You know, I don't know that I really necessarily like that so much, but anyway. And then the other thing too, that if I take my move tool, I can kind of nudge it. It looks like it's not, like this has a bit more of an overhang on the E, so it wasn't dead center. So if I wanted to really and truly center it, see, it gives me this vertical pink line, and it's going to center it for me like that. All right, so if I just kind of move it around, it'll fix this up for me and it finds the center. So that's good. Now, it's pretty hard to read because for one thing, it's a condensed font. So the letter forms are very thin. And in addition, you know, if you follow what the book says, it's kind of like spread it out so that the tracking kerning is like stretched out. And so one of the things that the book is going to suggest that you do is to, you know, I can take this type tool and I can select all of these things. And then I can come back over here to the character panel and I can give it what's referred to as a faux bold. And the reason that it wants you to give you faux bold is because you'll notice here where I've got my typeface, next to it, it would normally give me the styles that I would have available for that typeface. Because this is a specialty, like it's a display typeface, for instance, it only has one style. And I don't have like the ability to do something that's like light, medium, bold, you know, regular, italic, and so on. So what Photoshop in its character panel has is it has all these what are referred to as faux styles. So this is faux bold right here. You see me hovering over that. This is faux italic. Basically, what it'll do is it applies this fake bold or fake italic to something that's maybe a character that only has one style that does not allow for bolding or for italicizing and so forth. So if I were to follow what the book said and I click on faux bold, you see that it gets thicker. It does become a little bit easier to read. And technically, you know, maybe it's okay, right? However you want to look at that. One of the things that I would say, though, just from a typography standpoint, is that this is not a good practice, right? I wouldn't really recommend this. Um, the thing about typography is that a font is developed in such a way that it has all of the balances and the weights and the lengths of its pieces and parts designed for specific look and feel. And so the minute you start fidgeting with that and you start to do things like adding a faux bold or a faux italic, maybe there's a possibility that that typeface doesn't come with those character styles on purpose. Maybe it's because the designer never intended it for it to look that way. And so you have to make a decision if you're really okay with that. The other thing that you got to remember too is that let's say that this is really part of a brand, like maybe Hawaii Island Paradise is the brand, right? And so the other thing you have to think about is what other applications would I, you know, maybe want to have this in? Would I want to be able to print this not just using Photoshop tools? Would I want to be able to do this like say in Illustrator or, you know, with even other kinds of documents? And the reality is that, uh, you know, Illustrator and InDesign and things like that, they're not going to have these faux things in the same way that Photoshop does because they are more typographically oriented, those applications. And so really you kind of don't want to build something into like a brand trademark that uses these fake things based off of an existing typeface that doesn't have those real styles. So that's just a little bit of typography information. Because the book is telling you to do this, I disagree with this practice, but I will go ahead and, you know, just point that out to you. Something else too that the book does not tell you to do, but a lot of people are very tempted to do, is to scale typography by compressing it even more. Like, you know, somebody might look at this and go, okay, well, I'm not going to adjust the tracking. I'm going to just squish it. You know, I'm going to like just tell it how wide it needs to be. Well, that's a really terrible practice. Don't ever do that in my class because I will notice that you've done it. It's really obvious, and the reason it's obvious is because the letter forms start to look really imbalanced. They don't look good, and it's because you are changing the weights and the proportions of the font in such a way that they don't look natural anymore. So anyway, all right, enough of that diatribe. And you know what we can do now is look at how to adjust where it says Hawaii to make a gradient in there. Okay, so you'll notice if we go back over here, I choose the Hawaii um, layer, you'll notice that this I mentioned before is a raster layer. It's not a editable type layer. You'll notice the difference in the way that editable type looks because Island Paradise has this T here, whereas Hawaii doesn't. All right, so that means it's a rasterized type layer. So what I can do if I want to select these pixels and like create a gradient or something inside is I can right click the thumbnail area right here. And it's different if I right click this, it's going to be different. Okay, so right click over the thumbnail of the layer you want to select the pixels for, and then you're going to choose select pixels, and then it will select the pixels that exist within that layer. Okay, and it's nice because it'll do a tight wrap around those pixels. All right, and you don't have to like go and make the selection yourself. It just does it for you, which is awesome. Now, while I have that selection made, I can go over to my tool panel on the left, and where you see a paint bucket, if you click and hold that, unless your gradient tool is already visible, you want to click and hold the paint bucket to make the gradient tool visible. Otherwise, it'll look like this in the gradient tool. And you can see that up here, it automatically wanted to make a gradient of my foreground and my background colors. Okay. Well, if you were to look at um, the way that the book wants you to do it, it doesn't want you to use that green color. It wants you to use like a sort of an orange to a white color. So if we click on this drop down, we can make some adjustments. I think in your book it tells you just pick a gradient that exists. but the reality is that it doesn't exist in my case. So the other option would be if you wanted to, you know, look at that gradient option, you could click on this foreground color and you could come down in here and you could adjust it so that it's using an orange color. So that's, you know, kind of up to you. You could also use a color picker to try to pick from some area within here. I'm just going to choose this sort of this golden orange, right? So I'll click on that, and then you see, because I changed my gradient or excuse me, I changed my foreground color down here, it also updated my gradient as well. All right, so that's kind of nice. Now, the way that I want to do this to draw a gradient is, I want to show you something. If I just click somewhere and then draw anywhere, like you see that you see that line that's showing up? I haven't let it go yet, so it hasn't drawn the gradient, but it's going to be the direction of the gradient that it's going to draw. And so if I don't constrain it in some way, you know, with a shift key or something, like that would be horizontal, that would be at a 45, this would be a total vertical, right? Then what's going to happen is it just sort of randomly creates that gradient. I'm going to undo that, and what I want to do is I want to draw the gradient from the bottom up. So I'm going to click somewhere down here, and then if I hold shift, it'll constrain it in one direction, and then I start to get my gradient. All right, and if you want it to be stronger, orange or something, you can do that. I can undo that. You can also start it like way down here if you want it to be lighter. So you can also start it closer in to make it heavier, but then release it like sooner inside of here. And then you get a much heavier orange that fades out a lot more quickly. So if you want to start low and then come up to maybe 3/4 of the way, you'll kind of get a comfortable looking gradient, I think, sort of comfortable looking gradient. All right, and so that actually is probably pretty good. And then if you want to deselect that, you can kind of see what it looks like. All right, and it's starting to look a little bit more like the example of the finished example. Okay, so the thing is that it's still kind of hard to read. So what we might want to do to make that text stand out is add a drop shadow. So I'm going to choose my Island Paradise first and get that to stand out. And so while I have Island Paradise selected, down below you'll see this FX button. If I click on that, I can choose, if I scroll down to the bottom, it says drop shadow. So I'm going to add a drop shadow, and you can already see that it starts popping out. And the blend mode currently is set to multiply, which is going to make it dark. So you want to leave that alone. You could play with the blend modes though. This is one of those places where sometimes it's kind of fun to play with it. I'm going to turn the opacity up so that it's a lot heavier. Somewhere in this range, it's a lot deeper and stronger. And I think that I'm probably okay with this angle, but if you wanted to change the light source angle, you can see that that's how that works. And you can look how it works down below. All right, I'll go back to, I think it was something like 78 was the standard. And if you want to increase the distance, right now it's set to 3 pixels. You can adjust the slider so that it's a little bit, you know, a little bit more dramatic. So you can adjust the slider, or you can type in a value. The other thing too is that you can adjust what's called the spread. Right now the spread is pretty tight. Well, actually it's very tight, it's 0. So if you wanted to change the spread, you can change it, and you see that it actually literally spreads out and it gets heavier, right? So that's another thing you can do. You can also change the size and adjust it so that it's a little bit bigger if you want. And what that actually does is it starts to adjust the blur of it. So that's kind of nice. And it really pops out like this, okay? So you know, I can agree to that, and I think I'm all right with that. Now, one thing that you would want to do is you would also want this on the Hawaii layer, and if you do that, instead of having to go to the Hawaii layer and recreate that entire thing, one thing you can do here is you can select this layer, and then you can right click on top of where it says effects. Okay, oops, I'm sorry. You can right click here over where it says the name, and then you want to scroll down quite a ways, like 3/4 of the way down. You want to choose where it says copy layer style, right? And what it's doing is it's going to copy that effect that you added. So I'm going to copy that layer style, and then on Hawaii, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say paste layer style. And then it automatically applies that same layer style with the same intensities, and so I don't have to recreate all of that. And something else too, that if you wanted to tie these two things together where it says Hawaii and then Island Paradise, something that you might find useful is uh, maybe applying like a little stroke around Hawaii, for instance. That would be one option. And then you can also sort of evaluate whether or not you like this color, this particular color of green, before you start to adjust the stroke on Hawaii. So if you go up to Island Paradise, one of the things uh, you can do for the color of the type is if you select the type tool while you have the type layer selected, you'll see that the options panel changes. And then for this, I could go up here and I could adjust the color. Now, if I like this color, but I want to, maybe put this hexadecimal number down here in the clipboard, it's got a little hashtag in front of it. If you copy that, that way if you adjust it, you can always just go back and paste a single number. But you can adjust this color so that it's like brighter, and you can kind of see it changing in live mode. So you could decide if you want this darker, which I think is too dark, or if you want it brighter, for instance, that's a little bit too bright. So you can adjust the color until you're kind of happy with the color that comes out of it, if you don't end up liking exactly what the book tells you to use. So it's really kind of your decision. So I think I might settle on something like that. All right. And then what I'll do is actually, if I want to go back and just click that, I actually can copy this new hexadecimal number. So I'm going to copy that, click OK. And now if I go back to my Hawaii, I can right click and select my pixels again. Okay. And I can add onto that layer effect a stroke. And then you see that it wants to put the stroke on the inside, so you can adjust that however you want. If you want it on the inside, outside, the outside, makes it like that. If you want to do center, you can make it like this, right? You can change the color. This is where you can add that green color instead. All right, and then the other thing that you probably want to do is adjust the stroke so that it's a lot smaller. So, all right, these are some things you can do. And then if you want to be able to see kind of what this thing looks like so that you can see like how big to make the stroke without these, they're referred to as marching ants, without your selection edges, you can temporarily go up here where it says view, and you're going to go where it says show, and you're going to deselect where it says selection edges. Now it's still selected, but now you can kind of see it without those selection edges. So you might want to like make the stroke even smaller, somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 3 or 4 pixels, right? And you could also adjust the opacity so that it's not so strong if you wanted, right? You may want it to be just as bright, it's really kind of up to you if you want to have the same intensity. So anyway, that's, as I said, that's up to you. And then you could check if you want it on the inside, if you want it on the outside, and you'll notice the difference is if you do it on the inside, you still get the full effect of that drop shadow. I think the book might tell you to do it, excuse me, on the outside. And when you do that, you start to lose some of the effect of that drop shadow. And I, to be honest, either kind of like it on the inside or on the center. So it kind of just depends on which version of it you like better. I tend to like the whole Hawaii, I think, on the inside. Let's see about the center. Yeah, I tend to like it better on the inside, to be honest. So, and maybe instead of 4 pixels, I might like 5 better so that it becomes more dramatic. So it's really, as I said, it's up to you. All right, so we'll click on OK, and you can kind of play around with those different options. All right, and so I think we're pretty good in terms of the typography department.